I don't even know where to start with this. I've been married to Sarah for 7 years now, and up until recently I thought we were living the dream. We had a nice house, good jobs, and a couple of adorable kids. Sure, we had our ups and downs like any couple, but I never thought we'd be facing something like this. It's funny how life can throw you a curveball when you're least expecting it. Lately, I'd noticed some changes in Sarah's behavior. She'd come home late from work more often and was increasingly glued to her phone. I tried to brush it off as work stress, maybe even a fleeting midlife crisis. At first, I didn't want to believe that anything was amiss. I mean, who wants to think their spouse is cheating? Just the thought of it made my stomach twist in knots. Then there were the small things, like her sudden obsession with her appearance. She started dressing up more for work, even on days when we didn't have plans afterward. And I caught her rolling her eyes and huffing at me when I tried to talk to her about trivial things. It was like something was brewing under the surface and I was too blind to see it. But the day it all boiled over was unforgettable. I was working from home that Friday, trying to wrap up some deadlines before the weekend when I happened to glance over at Sarah's phone. It lit up with a message notification, and without thinking I reached over and grabbed it. I know, it was wrong, but I was desperate to know what was going on. The message was from a number I didn't recognize, and my heart sank as I read it. Can't wait to see you later. I have a surprise for you. My hands started shaking and I could feel my chest tightening. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but it felt like the world shifted on its axis in that moment. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself that maybe it was just a friend or a colleague. But deep down, I knew better. I'd seen that same giddy excitement in her eyes when we first started dating, and I hadn't seen it in years. I had to confront her. When she got home, I didn't waste any time. I took a deep breath and confronted her about the message. "Who's this guy?" I demanded, feeling my anger bubble over. She looked at me, eyes wide, and then she did what I expected. She played dumb. "What guy? What are you talking about?" she replied, feigning innocence. The more I pushed, the more she started hurling accusations my way. "You're being paranoid, you always overthink everything." But I wasn't going to back down, not this time. As she began to twist the truth, crafting elaborate lies about how it was just a colleague from her office, I felt a cold wave of betrayal wash over me. I wanted to shake her and scream, but I just stood there feeling like a fool. I needed to know the truth, so I decided right then and there to do something about it. I felt like a mixture of rage, disbelief, and heartbreak. The emotional turmoil was overwhelming. Anger was my first instinct, but sadness crept in right behind it. I loved her, and here she was, with one foot out the door and a whole other life planned without me. What was I going to do? How could I let this slide? I had to find out more about who she was really with. After all, this wasn't just a passing fling. I knew in my gut it was something deeper, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. And that's when the idea hit me. I would turn the tables. Instead of wallowing in my sorrow or begging for her to stay, I would expose the man who was so boldly stepping into my life. Little did I know, the rabbit hole I was about to dive into would lead to a web of intrigue, deception, and revenge that I never saw coming. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that you can always get back at someone who wrongs you if you play your cards right. And I was ready to play. After that explosive confrontation with Sarah, I felt like I was in a fog. The reality of the situation was almost too much to process. I spent the next couple of days trying to gather my thoughts and figure out my next move. I knew I had to be smart about it. I couldn't just charge in blindly. I needed concrete proof of her infidelity. I started by digging deeper into her life. My first instinct was to check her social media. I had thought about that countless times before. I wasn't really a social media guy, but I figured it was time to create an account and start snooping. I set up a fake profile, an old high school friend who had moved away, and began hunting through her posts and friends. What I found was shocking. Sarah had been much more active on social media than I realized, posting pictures at places I never knew she visited. Each photo was like a dagger to my heart. She looked happy, carefree, and it was clear she'd been spending time with someone else. As I scrolled through these snapshots of her life, I felt a mix of anger and sheer betrayal. I didn't recognize the man in some of the pictures, but I could see that he was comfortable with her. They shared the kind of intimacy that was supposed to be ours. I spent hours piecing together a timeline of her activities. Each click of the mouse felt heavier than the last as I unearthed evidence of her lies. The thrill of the hunt began to fuel my determination. I found Sarah's old college friend, who I knew lived nearby, and sent her a message under my fake profile, asking if she knew anything about Sarah's recent activities. She responded quickly, revealing that Sarah had been acting differently, mentioning late nights at work and a certain detective she'd been hanging out with. That word hit me like a freight train. I wasn't sure why it took me so long to realize it, but Sarah was cheating with a private detective. I had heard stories about these kinds of affairs, but I never thought it would happen to me. I was furious, but I also had to admit it was somewhat clever on her part. Who would suspect a private investigator to be the other man? From that moment on, my focus shifted. I needed to know more about this guy, who he was, what he did, and how I could turn this around on both of them. I decided I would gather enough evidence to make sure he faced the consequences of this sordid affair along with Sarah. I wasn't just going to sit back and let them get away with it. It was time for me to play the detective. I started researching private investigators in our area, trying to find one who matched the description from Sarah's friend. After hours of searching, I landed on a name, Jake Reynolds. His website boasted of discretion and professionalism with testimonials that sang his praises. But I knew better. There had to be more lurking beneath that polished exterior. I decided to follow him. I had a friend who worked in law enforcement, and I reached out to him for a bit of advice on how to do this without drawing attention. He suggested I rent a car to avoid being recognized and gave me some tips on how to tail someone effectively. The night I decided to put my plan into action was cold and drizzly, which was perfect for blending into the shadows. I parked a few blocks away from Sarah's office, my heart racing as I watched the entrance. I had no idea if I would see them together that evening, but the anticipation was electric. After what felt like an eternity, I saw Sarah leave work, her hair blowing slightly in the wind. I waited, trying to calm my breathing, and then I saw him, a tall guy with dark hair and a confident stride. They approached each other, and when Sarah wrapped her arms around him, I felt my stomach drop. The sight of them together ignited a fire within me that I hadn't experienced before. I knew in that moment that I couldn't just watch anymore. I snapped a few pictures of them together, their laughter echoing in the night air. I was filled with a twisted sense of satisfaction. I would use these as leverage, not just to confront Sarah, but to make sure Jake faced repercussions too. As they left the office and headed to a nearby bar, I followed at a distance, my adrenaline pumping. It was surreal, thinking that the woman I loved was enjoying herself with another man while I was out here plotting my revenge. I felt like a character in a bad movie, but at the same time, something deep within me was awakening. I was done being a victim. I would ensure they both faced the consequences of their actions. As I watched them laugh and drink, I couldn't help but feel that I was one step closer to taking back control of not just my life but my dignity. I was no longer the clueless husband. I was becoming the architect of my own revenge, and I was ready to bring the whole facade crashing down. The following days turned into a whirlwind of planning and strategizing. The images I had captured of Sarah and Jake were seared into my mind, fueling my motivation. I needed to confront Sarah with undeniable evidence, but I also had to prepare for the fallout. I wasn't just playing for my own dignity. I was playing for our children, for the life we had built together. It was a delicate balance, and I had to tread carefully. I spent hours compiling everything I had learned. I gathered the photos, along with snippets of the conversations I had uncovered on social media and the messages exchanged with her friends. I felt like a detective myself, piecing together the puzzle of her deceitful life. I also began to dig into Jake's background. A few phone calls and some internet sleuthing revealed just enough. He had a decent reputation, but had faced allegations of unprofessional conduct in the past. It was all the ammunition I needed to ensure he wouldn't walk away unscathed from this situation. I decided to confront Sarah on a Sunday afternoon. I figured it would be the best time to have an honest conversation when the kids were occupied with their toys in the living room. I could feel my heart racing in my chest as I prepared what I was going to say. I wanted her to know that I was not only hurt but angry and determined to take action. "Can we talk?" I asked her, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sure, what's up?" She replied, looking slightly distracted as she scrolled through her phone. I could tell she was in no rush to engage, but I wasn't about to let that deter me. I took a deep breath and laid the evidence on the table, literally. I pulled out the photos and laid them in front of her. "Who's this?" I asked, pointing to the picture of her and Jake laughing together in a bar, their chemistry evident. Her face drained of color as she looked at the image. "What is this?" she stammered, trying to regain her composure. "I think you know exactly what it is." "This isn't just a friendly drink after work, is it?" I pressed. Her initial shock turned into anger and she shot back. "You're being ridiculous. Those are just photos. You can't just assume things." I pushed further, revealing the messages I had found and the bits of information I had gathered about her late nights. "This isn't just a coincidence, Sarah. You've been lying to me for way too long. You've been seeing him, haven't you?" It was like watching her mask crack. For a moment I saw genuine fear flash across her face. "Fine. Yes, I've been seeing him, but it's not what you think. You don't understand." "Try me," I replied, my voice low but steady. I could feel the anger rising in me, but I had to remain composed. I wanted her to see that I was in control now. She launched into a whirlwind of excuses, twisting the narrative to make herself the victim. "You don't take me seriously. You've been so wrapped up in your work." I felt alone. "Jake was just a friend who listened to me," she insisted, her voice rising. "Just a friend, you think I believe that?" I shot back, incredulous. "You've been spending time with him for months. Don't try to play me for a fool." "I was unhappy, and I thought you didn't care anymore," she yelled, her frustration boiling over. "I tried to reach out, but you never listened." I felt my heart shatter as she unleashed her grievances. It was true that I had been consumed by work and the pressures of family life, but I never realized it had pushed her to the arms of another man. "But cheating isn't the answer, Sarah. You could have talked to me," I exclaimed, my voice cracking. "Talk to you?" she scoffed. "You never have the time. You're always working late or distracted." I felt like I was invisible. It was a bitter pill to swallow. Part of me felt guilty, but I couldn't let her manipulate me into feeling responsible for her actions. "You made a choice. You chose to betray me and our family, and now you'll face the consequences." There was a moment of silence as the weight of my words settled in the room. I could see the realization dawning on her. "What do you mean consequences?" she asked, her voice trembling now. "I have evidence not just of your affair but also of your so-called friend's unethical practices as a private investigator. I know what he's done, and I'm not going to let either of you walk away from this without facing what you've done," I said, feeling a sense of empowerment surge through me. Her eyes widened in shock, and suddenly the confident facade she had been maintaining crumbled. "You wouldn't do that?" she pleaded, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Oh, I will," I replied, steady and resolute. "You're not the only one with cards to play, Sarah. You might have thought you could get away with this, but I'm just getting started." The confrontation left us both shaken. I walked away from the conversation feeling a mix of triumph and sadness. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life, but it wasn't going to be easy. I didn't really want to hurt her. I wanted to make her understand the gravity of her betrayal. But I also knew that sometimes people need a harsh wake-up call to realize the consequences of their actions. As I lay in bed that night, I felt a sense of clarity wash over me. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about self-preservation. I had to make sure I was protected, and that meant I needed to execute my next steps very carefully. I would bring Jake's actions to light, ensuring both he and Sarah would face the repercussions of their choices. The emotional roller coaster had only just begun, and I was prepared to see it through to the bitter end. After that explosive confrontation with Sarah, I felt like I had kicked open a door to a new chapter in my life. I was no longer willing to play the victim. I was stepping into my power. But I knew that to truly take control of the situation, I needed to be strategic about my next moves. It was time to put my plan into action. I started by gathering all the evidence I had compiled over the past weeks. Photos, messages, social media posts, everything was organized meticulously. I even made notes on the timeline of their affair, complete with dates and locations. I wanted to ensure that when I took this to the authorities, there would be no question of the gravity of the situation. But before I moved forward, I reached out to my friend in law enforcement for advice. I explained the situation as best as I could, leaving out details that might make me seem vindictive. He listened intently and offered to help me make sure the right people were aware of Jake's unprofessional conduct as a private investigator. He suggested I file a formal complaint to the state board that licensed private investigators in our area. It was a solid plan, and it made me feel like I was finally taking action rather than just reacting. That evening, I composed a detailed letter. I narrated everything I had discovered about Jake's shady dealings, including the fact that he had crossed professional boundaries by engaging in a relationship with a client's spouse. I attached copies of the evidence I had collected, ensuring that the board would see the full picture. It felt cathartic to write down everything, almost like I was purging the pain and anger I had been holding onto. Once I sent off the complaint, I turned my attention back to Sarah. I needed to confront her again. But this time, I wanted to gauge her honesty. I wanted to see if she would come clean about everything now that I had initiated the process to expose Jake. I could still hear the desperation in her voice from our last talk, and I hoped that the fear of losing everything would push her to be truthful this time. The following week, I found the perfect moment to have a serious discussion with her. It happened one evening after the kids had gone to bed. The house was quiet, save for the muffled sounds of our neighbors laughing outside. I sat her down, my heart pounding with apprehension and resolve. "I need to know everything, Sarah," I started, keeping my tone steady. "No more lies. I've already taken steps to expose Jake for what he is. This is your chance to come clean." She looked taken aback, her eyes widening in surprise. "What do you mean you're exposing him?" she asked, her voice tinged with apprehension. "I filed a complaint against him with the state board. I have evidence of your affair and his illegal practices as a private investigator. If you don't come clean, you'll be dragged into this too," I warned, trying to convey the seriousness of the situation. For a moment, Sarah sat there in stunned silence, processing what I had just said. I could see the wheels turning in her mind. "You can't be serious," she exclaimed. "You wouldn't do that to me." "Wouldn't I? You've already done it to yourself, haven't you? I'm just making sure you both face the consequences of your actions," I replied, feeling the adrenaline rush through me. She took a deep breath, the color draining from her face. I didn't think you would go this far. I thought you'd just let it go." "Let it go? After everything, why would you think that?" I challenged her, my voice rising a bit. Finally, she seemed to break. Okay, I'll tell you everything," she blurted out, tears streaming down her face. "I was lonely and confused. I thought I could have something with him without it affecting what we had. I never meant for it to go this far." As she confessed, I felt a mix of anger and sadness. It hurt to hear her admit that she had sought comfort in someone else, someone who was supposed to be a professional but turned out to be just as unethical as she was. "So you think that just apologizing will fix everything?" I asked, barely able to contain my rage. "No, I don't expect that. I realize now how stupid I was. I was trying to fill a void that I let grow between us," she said, her voice trembling. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You thought sleeping with a private detective would fill a void. You thought cheating was the answer." I pressed, incredulous. "I was desperate, David. I didn't know how to reach out to you anymore. You were always working and I felt like I was alone," she replied, her voice breaking. "Desperate or not, you made a choice. You decided to betray me and our family. You chose him over us," I said, my heart heavy with the weight of her admission. As the conversation continued, I realized that while I had come to confront her about Jake and the affair, I was also uncovering layers of our relationship that needed to be rest. We had both neglected our marriage, but that didn't excuse her actions. I felt a newfound clarity as we talked, and while I was still angry, I also felt a sense of compassion for the loneliness she had experienced. But compassion wouldn't erase the hurt. I made it clear that I needed time to process everything. I don't know what's next for us, Sarah. I need to think about whether I can even begin to rebuild trust after this, I said, my voice steady but filled with uncertainty. As I walked away from that conversation, I felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. I had exposed the truth, but I was still left with a fractured marriage and a long road ahead. The path of healing wouldn't be easy, but it was a necessary step. I had to figure out what I truly wanted, whether it was to try and salvage our relationship or to cut my losses and move on. Little did I know, the web of deceit had yet to unravel completely. My actions had set off a chain reaction that would ultimately lead me deeper into this tangled mess, and I was prepared for whatever came. Next, the stakes had been raised and I was ready to see this through, hoping to emerge from the ashes of betrayal stronger and wiser. After my confrontation with Sarah, I felt like I was standing at a crossroads. We had opened up about our feelings, and while it was cathartic, the pain of betrayal still lingered like a heavy cloud over our home. I needed time to think, time to process everything that had happened. The world I knew had shifted dramatically, and now I was faced with difficult choices. For the next few days, I focused on maintaining a semblance of normalcy for the sake of our kids. We went through the motions, family dinners, homework sessions, and bedtime stories, but I felt disconnected. Every laugh from the kids pulled at my heartstrings, reminding me of the cracks forming in our family. I knew I had to confront Sarah again, but I was still processing my emotions and figuring out what I wanted. Meanwhile, I waited for a response from the state board regarding my complaint against Jake. The anticipation was palpable. I checked my email obsessively, hopping for any news that would confirm my actions were making an impact. I was determined to ensure that both Sarah and Jake faced the consequences of their actions, but I was also aware that I needed to tread carefully. This was not just about revenge. It was about protecting myself and my family. Then, one afternoon, I received an unexpected phone call. It was my friend from law enforcement, and he had news. "David, I wanted to let you know that the board received your complaint. They're going to follow up with an investigation. I can't disclose too much, but it looks like they're taking it seriously," he said, his tone serious. A wave of relief washed over me. I felt vindicated knowing that I had done something to stand up for myself, but I also felt a surge of anxiety. What would happen next? Would the investigation lead to legal trouble for Jake? Would it push Sarah further away? I was about to find out. That evening, I decided it was time for another frank discussion with Sarah. I wanted to gauge her reaction to the news and see if she was genuinely remorseful or if she was simply scared of the consequences. I gathered my thoughts and sat her down, my heart racing as I prepared for what I hoped would be a productive conversation. "Sarah, I received a call today about the complaint I filed against Jake." I started, my voice steady but firm. Her expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "What did they say?" she asked, her eyes widening. "They're investigating his conduct as a private investigator, which includes his involvement with you," I explained, watching her reaction closely. She fell silent for a moment, processing the information. I could see the gears turning in her mind, and I wasn't sure if she was feeling regret or simply afraid of the fallout. "What does that mean for us?" she finally asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know what it means for us, Sarah. I need to know if you're willing to work on our marriage or if you think this is the end. Your actions put everything at risk, and I can't just pretend it didn't happen," I replied honestly. "I want to work on it, David," she said, her voice breaking. "I made a huge mistake, and I regret it every day. I want to fix what we have, but I need you to understand that I was feeling so lost. I didn't know how to reach out to you. I should have talked to you, not turned to someone else." The sincerity in her voice hit me, but I still felt guarded. "It's going to take a lot more than words to rebuild trust," I said, trying to keep my emotions in check. "You need to show me that you're committed to making things right." "I will do whatever it takes," she promised, her eyes pleading. "I love you, David, and I want our family to heal. I know I've hurt you, but I want to prove that I can change." As we talked, I began to feel a flicker of hope. Maybe there was a chance for us after all, but I also knew that trust wouldn't be rebuilt easily. It would require transparency and honesty, things that had been sorely lacking in our relationship. We'll need to communicate openly from now on, and you'll have to be completely honest with me about everything," I said, setting the groundwork for our new path. The conversation continued late into the night, and I felt a glimmer of connection as we opened up about our feelings and fears. But even as we talked, I couldn't shake the worry about Jake and the consequences Sarah would face. I knew she had made a mistake, but would her remorse hold up when faced with the reality of losing everything? A few days later, I received another call from my friend in law enforcement. "David, I wanted to give you an update. The board has reached out to Jake about the allegations, and they're taking this very seriously. They may conduct interviews with you and Sarah as part of their investigation, and they're also looking into his other cases," he explained. The gravity of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. Jake's actions could have ramifications that extended beyond just our personal lives. If he truly was engaging in unethical behavior, who else had he affected? It was a chilling thought, but it also galvanized my resolve. I needed to see this through, both for my sake and for others who might have fallen victim to his unscrupulous tactics. "Thanks for the update. I appreciate you looking out for me," I said, my mind racing with the implications. As I hung up the phone, I turned to Sarah. "They're serious about Jake, and it looks like this is going to escalate," I said, a mix of anger and resolve coursing through me. "You need to be prepared for what might come next." She looked at me, fear evident in her eyes. "I understand, and I'll be ready. I'll do whatever it takes to support us through this," she said, her determination palpable. That night, we sat together and began to talk about what our future might look like. I didn't know if I could fully trust her again, but I felt like we were at least starting to rebuild. We made plans to attend couples therapy together, a step I hoped would help us navigate the complexities of our relationship. But as we prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let fear dictate my actions anymore. I was ready to face the truth head-on, no matter how difficult it might be. The storm was brewing, and I was prepared to weather it, determined to emerge on the other side stronger than ever. Little did I know, the journey was far from over, and the real test of our resilience was still to come. The weeks that followed were a wild ride filled with a dizzying mix of emotions. As Sarah and I navigated the fallout from her affair with Jake, we found ourselves in a precarious position. The investigation was ongoing, and I was determined to see it through while also trying to rebuild my marriage. It felt like walking a tightrope, and I wasn't sure how long I could keep my balance. We attended couples therapy sessions together, which proved to be both eye-opening and challenging. The therapist encouraged us to be honest about our feelings and to start rebuilding trust. Sarah shared her feelings of loneliness and frustration, while I expressed my anger and hurt. It was a messy process, one that brought tears and difficult conversations, but I could feel a shift in our dynamic. For the first time in years, we were really talking. Meanwhile, I kept an eye on the investigation regarding Jake. I received updates from my friend in law enforcement, who informed me that the board was taking the allegations seriously. They had already interviewed several clients of his and were uncovering a pattern of unethical behavior. It was a relief to know that Jake's actions were being scrutinized, but it also made me anxious about the impact it might have on Sarah. One afternoon, I found myself sitting in my office, staring at the photos I had taken of Sarah and Jake. They served as painful reminders of the betrayal, but they also fueled my resolve. I had taken the steps necessary to expose him, and I knew I had done the right thing. My heart still ached, but I was determined to forge ahead. As the investigation progressed, I started to question whether I could truly forgive Sarah. She was trying her best to show me she was committed to repairing our marriage, but I couldn't shake the lingering doubts. Every time she reached for my hand or hugged me, I felt a mix of love and betrayal. It was agonizing. Then came the day of reckoning. I received a call from my friend, who informed me that Jake had been summoned for a formal hearing regarding the complaints lodged against him. "David, you might want to attend. It could be a chance for you to confront him and share your experiences in person," he suggested. I hesitated, Part of me wanted to be there to see him held accountable, but another part of me feared what it could unleash. I glanced over at Sarah, who was sitting across the room, her expression unreadable. This was as much about her as it was about me. "Are you coming with me?" I asked her, my voice hesitant. She looked thoughtful for a moment before nodding. "I'll be there," she said, her determination clear. "I want to face the consequences of my actions too. I owe it to you and to our family." The day of the hearing arrived and the atmosphere was charged with tension. I sat beside Sarah in the small room, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. Jake walked in and the air shifted. He appeared confident at first, but as the board members began to question him, I could see the facade starting to crack. He was evasive, trying to deflect blame and minimize his actions. When it was my turn to speak, I felt a mix of anger and empowerment. I stood in front of the board and Jake, laying out the details of my experience. I mentioned the photos, the messages, and my feelings of betrayal. I could feel Sarah's presence beside me, and I knew she was feeling the heat of the moment too. As I spoke, I could see Jake's arrogance fatting. He squirmed under the weight of the evidence I presented, and I could sense that the board members were taking my words seriously. There was something liberating about standing up for myself and exposing the truth. After my testimony, the board deliberated and ultimately decided to suspend Jake's license pending further investigation. It was a bittersweet victory. While I felt a sense of justice served, I also knew this was just one step in a long journey of healing. In the aftermath of the hearing, Sarah and I found ourselves reflecting on everything that had transpired. I could see the guilt etched on her face, but she was also determined to make amends. We spent hours talking, sharing our fears and hopes for the future. Slowly but surely, we began to reconnect. The process wasn't easy. There were still moments of tension and hurt that crept in, but we were learning to communicate more openly. I could feel hope beginning to blossom in our relationship, but I also knew it would take time for trust to fully return. As the weeks turned into months, we attended therapy regularly and found new ways to appreciate each other. We began planning family activities to strengthen our bond, and we made an effort to carve out time for just the two of us. It was a slow road, but each small step felt significant. Looking back, I realized that this experience had changed me. It forced me to confront my own shortcomings, to stand up for myself, and to understand the importance of communication. It was a painful lesson, but one that ultimately brought me closer to the truth of who I was and what I wanted. Now, as I reflect on everything that transpired, I feel a mix of gratitude and resolve. I've learned that relationships take work, and sometimes it takes a crisis to shake things up and force you to confront the real issues. While Sarah and I may still have a long way to go, I feel optimistic about the future. In the end, the betrayal was a catalyst for growth, not just for me but for us both. It taught me the value of self-advocacy, and it reminded me that love can endure even the most challenging trials. No matter what happens from here, I know that I have the strength to weather the storms of life and emerge stronger on the other side.